In the shadow of the largest arena humanity ever built, you are breathing inside a stone cell. Beyond the ceiling, 50,000 Romans just watched your husband die fighting a lion. Now they are dispersing, the roar receding, the torches dimming. At that exact moment, a sound rises from below, heavy, measured footsteps. Deliberate steps growing clearer as they approach. A silhouette settles at the threshold. This is the gladiator who survived today's slaughter, someone else's blood still marking him. A guard turns a key. The door opens. The gladiator raises his eyes and selects you, points at you. This is not a horror film scene. This was an ordinary Tuesday in the Roman Empire. Now I'm going to show you the side of Roman history they don't teach in classrooms. A systematic nightmare that began after the crowds went home and the doors closed, operated by the state itself. This is not speculation. It exists in the Romans' own records, and its traces are literally carved into the walls beneath the Colosseum. If you stay until the end, you will never look at ancient Rome the same way again. Hollywood has been selling you Gladiators as a polished legend for decades. Gladiator, Spartacus. They showed you the blood and the fighting, the honor and the rebellion. But what began when the games ended, when the arena gates closed and the hours advanced, that part they almost always skipped. The moment when the public spectacle transformed into something far more sinister. That is what they never showed. I'm talking about a system so structured that modern historians had to coin a new Latin term just to describe it. Victoria carnalis. Carnal victory. The Romans themselves would never have called it that, because to them it wasn't remarkable enough to require a name. It was the normal part of the order. What we know with certainty, Roman writers like Martial, Juvenal, and Seneca speak of a world where conquered women were held beneath arenas and distributed like prizes, not metaphorically, but literally. They describe women given to gladiators who performed well, the way rations are issued to soldiers. The Roman state, the government itself, operated this arrangement with the same bureaucratic efficiency it used to build aqueducts and roads. Consider this. The same civilization that gave us concrete and the idea of representative governance also perfected the industrialization of sexual violence. Before we go deeper, I want something from you. Look at the like button. If you believe hidden history should be brought to light even when it's disturbing, press it and write in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story isn't only about Rome, it's about what empires do when no one is watching. Now let's descend into the hypogeum. To grasp what was happening in those underground rooms, you first need to understand how Rome reduced a human being to an inventory item. This was not uncontrolled savagery. It was a planned, repeated mechanism of dehumanization operating at industrial scale, and it activated the moment Roman legions seized a new piece of territory. When Rome suppressed a revolt in Gaul or razed a city in Judea, it wasn't simply winning a military victory. It was absorbing a population into the system. It functioned like a production line built for human suffering. Men of fighting age were sent to mines or arenas to be consumed until they died. Children were distributed to slave markets across the empire. Women were registered as captiva, state-owned war spoils. And here is where things become truly staggering. Under Roman law, these people were no longer human. They had been placed in the category of res, things, the same legal framework as furniture or animals. A conquered woman had no more rights before the law than a chair. Everything done to her was technically not a crime, because the law did not define offenses against an object. But Rome did not dehumanize through law alone. It did so on stage as well. The games were not mere entertainment. They were political theater delivering a message to conquered peoples and Roman citizens alike. When you watched a captured Germanic chieftain fight a lion, you were not simply watching a man die. You were watching the consequence of challenging the empire. And when midday arrived, when the elite withdrew for lunch, the spectacle evolved into something darker still. Mythological reenactments that historians call lethal charades would begin. The stage was legend. The death was real. The poet Martial, writing in the 1st century CE, recounts these scenes with disturbing ordinariness, almost as if reviewing a restaurant. He describes a condemned man cast as Orpheus, whose music once enchanted all living creatures, being led into the arena, then a bear released. When the bear tears the man apart, Martial records, almost with the tone of disappointment, that the music did not work this time, while tens of thousands above were eating their honeyed dates. In another passage, and this one is particularly disturbing, Martial refers to a condemned woman forced to reenact the myth of Pasiphae. In the legend, Pasiphae united with a sacred bull. For this prisoner, it meant being subjected to an animal attack before thousands of spectators and dying of her wounds. Think about that again. The Roman state had constructed a system in which people were killed by animal attacks for the lunchtime entertainment of the public. This was not the depravity of one mad emperor. It was an established practice, repeated across decades. Senators brought their children to these spectacles. Events were announced on city walls. Vendors distributed snacks to the crowd. Martial states plainly that whatever myth demanded, the arena made it real. But what is truly disturbing is this. He was not writing this as criticism. He was writing it as praise. He was admiring the system's effectiveness. It was in precisely this environment, a bureaucratized industrial order of cruelty, that conquered women were incorporated into the reward mechanism designed for gladiators. Now let us look at the men who received these rewards. Gladiators lived inside a paradox Rome could never resolve. They were simultaneously at the very bottom of society and its most visible figures. Legally, they were slaves, sometimes holding even less status than a dog, but their faces appeared in mosaics. Their names were carved into walls by admirers. Aristocratic women were known to be obsessed with them. Pompeii graffiti calls one gladiator the girl's heartache, another the lady's pride. Cases are recorded of noble women bribing guards to slip into gladiator schools. A gladiator named Sergius is said to have conducted affairs with married patrician women, generating scandals. Stranger still, even their bodies were commodified. After a fight, gladiators' sweat was collected, mixed with olive oil, and sold as an aphrodisiac or cosmetic. Consider that. An enslaved man's sweat was bottled and offered to the upper classes. Fame and degradation lived in the same body. But Rome also feared these men. The Spartacus revolt of 73 BCE was carved into collective memory. 78 gladiators had escaped, assembled a force of tens of thousands within a short time, and nearly brought Rome to its knees. For 2 years they humiliated the legions. When the uprising was suppressed, 6,000 people were crucified along the Via Appia, across roughly 200 kilometers from Capua to Rome, a body at nearly every 40 meters. A corridor of crosses. That trauma never left Rome's mind. Every time a gladiator strapped on a sword, every time a lanista ran a school, every spectator in the stands remembered how close these men had once come to setting Rome on fire. So how do you control men this dangerous, this valuable, with genuine cause to revolt? Through calculated rewards alongside harsh punishments, extra rations, money, the possibility of freedom after sufficient victories. And something else the sources imply: access to conquered women. The documentation is frustratingly fragmentary. Roman writers mention it in passing, as if it were a detail everyone already knew. But when you place the references in Martial, Juvenal, and later sources side by side, a pattern emerges. Particularly in major games financed by emperors or wealthy senators, gladiators who survived impressively and fought well were given what ancient texts vaguely call the victor's privileges. When modern historians read between the lines and compare this with military reward practices and slave management, they conclude that this most often meant access to female prisoners held beneath the arena. The process appears unsettlingly orderly. The gladiator is escorted into the hypogeum, the complex underground network beneath the arena floor, still in his armor, sand and dried blood on his skin. A ludus official or arena administrator accompanies him. They move through tunnels lit by oil lamps, past animal cages and lifting mechanisms, and arrive at a specific cell section. These spaces are not ordinary dungeons. Archaeological findings from amphitheaters across the empire, including those beneath Capua, Pompeii, and the Colosseum, reveal small rooms with distinctive features: stone ledges, iron rings fixed to walls at waist height and near the floor, heavy doors that lock from the outside. In some rooms, there is evidence that chains were permanently mounted into the architecture. The women held in these cells may have been classified as captivae damnatae, condemned war prisoners. Rome's conquest bureaucracy had already processed them. Their names and categories were entered into the registers of commentary officials who tracked state property. Each numbered by origin: Germanica, Britannica, Parthica. The gladiator is shown a row of cells. Some accounts imply he had a choice. Others suggest the women were assigned as goods pulled from a warehouse. In either case, a guard unlocks the designated cell. The woman is brought out, or the gladiator is pushed in. The door closes. The lock turns from outside. What happened after that the texts do not describe in detail, but it requires little imagination. The documents fall silent. The architecture speaks. And what is truly disturbing, this was not legally a crime. Most Romans did not even view it as a moral problem. It was part of the operational order of the games. The logistics of Victoria Carnalis were managed by the same administrators who scheduled animal fights and maintained arena equipment. From the state's perspective, this arrangement solved multiple problems with a single mechanism. It rewarded loyal gladiators at low cost. Conquered women were already counted as war spoils, so they placed no burden on the budget. It reinforced the gladiator's sense of power and privilege without granting him real freedom or authority. It delivered the same message to both the fighter and the conquered people. This is what Roman dominion means. The victory you win in the arena grants you, over the conquered body, an absolute right of possession, similar to the emperor's over his provinces. A Roman whose name was lost but whose words were preserved by later historians summarized it thus: "The victor claims his reward as the right to conquer the empire's provinces." Now let us look at the physical spaces where this occurred, because archaeology does not stay silent here. When the area beneath the Colosseum was first excavated in the 19th century, researchers focused primarily on the engineering marvels: the elevator systems that raised animals to the arena, the complex tunnels carrying staff and equipment. But as excavations deepened, something unexpected emerged: small private rooms with no apparent logistical function. These rooms are typically around 10 to 15 square meters. They are located in a section of the hypogeum separated from the animal cages and gladiator preparation areas. What unsettles modern archaeologists are the details: stone ledges aligned along the walls, but at a specific height, different from those in other areas. Iron rings fixed at different levels, some near the floor, some at waist height, some higher. The doors are thick wood, iron reinforced, and lock from the outside. Some walls bear scratch marks, irregular abrasions that look like attempts to cut into hard stone. Cassius Dio, writing in the 3rd century CE, mentions that beneath major amphitheaters there were rooms for those waiting to be used. The phrase is deliberately vague, but the context addresses the logistics of the games, specifically the management of their human elements. The most disturbing findings are the graffiti. In the hypogeum of the Capua amphitheater, the city where Spartacus launched his revolt, archaeologists identified writings scratched into cell walls, some in Latin, some in languages from different regions of the empire. Most are fragmented and incomplete, but some are still legible. One line, carved in rough Latin by someone for whom it was not a native language, translates roughly as, "I was Aemilia from the Brigantes. I watched my children be killed. Now I am nothing. Another scratching, believed to be in Celtic, carries the plea, if there is a God who listens, let me die before tomorrow. These are not the voices history typically preserves. Roman chronicles record the names of emperors and generals. They track victories and architectural achievements. They do not write down the names of conquered women classified as property, but stone remembers. The architecture tells us something critical. This order was designed not for impulse, but for repetition and efficiency. These spaces were not the rooms of momentary rage. They were facilities built and maintained for specific functions. Compared with the other elements of Rome's gladiator management, the pattern sharpens. Gladiator barracks, animal quarters, weapons depots. Every component of arena infrastructure was planned and standardized across the empire. Rooms designated for captivi were part of the same order. This was an infrastructure built for systematic exploitation. Some historians are cautious, of course. They argue that these rooms should not be overinterpreted, that they may have served different purposes, and that modern concerns are being projected onto ambiguous findings. But when you consider the architecture together with the literary references, with the logic of spoils and slavery embedded in Roman military culture, and with the simple logic of how the system operated, the picture that emerges becomes uncomfortably clear. And now we come to the hardest part. What did this mean for the women locked inside this system? History is almost entirely silent about their individual experiences. No diaries, no testimony. Only ledgers and inventory records. Germanic woman, approximately 20 years of age, healthy, dispatched to the Colosseum holding unit. Not a human being, a line item. But from what we know of the conquest process, we can reconstruct this nightmare in reverse. These women were not randomly selected. They came from specific and deep traumas. When Rome seized a resisting region during the Dacian Wars, or after suppressing the British revolt led by Boudica, what followed was not random. The process was methodical. Roman military procedure required the systematic processing of the civilian population after the final engagement. Men of fighting age were killed or enslaved for heavy labor. Children below a certain age were separated from their families, sent to slave markets in the East, never to see their homeland again. Women of childbearing age were registered as captives, chained and dispatched to holding facilities. For a woman who had reached this point, the road to the arena meant passing through more than one circle of hell already. You may have watched your village burn. You may have witnessed the moment your children were torn screaming from your arms. You may have been chained alongside dozens of other women and marched hundreds of kilometers to Rome. Stripped, examined like livestock, tagged with a number, and locked into a cell beneath the greatest monument of the civilization that had swallowed you. The waiting itself would become its own form of torture. You could hear every sound from above. The crowd's reactions as people you might have recognized were killed in creative ways for entertainment. The screams of the animals being slaughtered. The surge of excitement when a gladiator landed a skillfully placed killing blow. And you would carry one single certainty. There is no way out of here. There was no ransom system, no prisoner exchange. Rome did not negotiate with the conquered. The people in your homeland, if they had survived at all, could never learn what had happened to you. You would be silently erased between the empire's gears. Then the footsteps would come again. The cell door would open. A selection would be made. And you would be left on the inside of a locked door with a man who had spent his afternoon killing human beings for an audience. Roman law offered you no protection. Because you were not legally a person, you could not appeal to a magistrate. You could not even carry out suicide, rarely regarded as an honorable escape in Roman culture, because if you succeeded, you would have deprived the state of its property. Your body would still be used, only for a different purpose. This was psychological warfare conducted at the scale of civilization. The humiliation of conquered women was not a byproduct of Roman military policy, it was a deliberate strategy. The goal was to break the spirit of resistance so thoroughly that future generations would not dare even contemplate challenging Rome. Ancient texts do not merely imply this, they record it explicitly. After the Jewish revolt was suppressed in 70 CE, Flavius Josephus writes that the Romans distributed Jewish women specifically among the legions and for the games. He notes this was done to show the survivors that they had lost not only their sovereignty, but their capacity to protect their families. The message is clear: resist Rome, and this is what becomes of your daughters. Yet sometimes this order cracked from unexpected directions. Rome, for all its industrial cruelty, was obsessed with preserving certain narratives about itself. The empire saw itself as the force bringing order and civilization to the barbarous world. This self-image required certain horrors to remain invisible. And this brings us to something that made the system uncomfortably visible: female gladiators. Exceedingly rare, but women did fight in the arena. Ancient sources conflict on the identity of these women. Some were clearly slaves forced to fight, but some examples point to women of noble origin who, in a culture that allowed women almost no room to move, saw the arena as a strange field of power and fame. The existence of gladiatrices scandalized the Roman elite. The satirist Juvenal writes dismissively of aristocratic women training with gladiatorial weapons. What modesty can be left in a woman who wears a helmet? For him, the issue was not merely the violence, it was the overturning of order. Around 200 CE, Emperor Septimius Severus attended games in Antioch that featured female fighters. According to Cassius Dio, who witnessed the games, an interesting distinction emerged. Greek spectators met the scene with shock and discomfort. They watched with the same gravity they would have shown male gladiators. Roman spectators mocked, made sexual insinuations, and treated the fight as an obscene spectacle. Female fighters were perceived not as warriors but as a misplaced erotic element. Severus is said to have been shamed, not by the violence itself, but by the Romans' inability to separate violence from sexuality when a woman was involved. The games are a propaganda instrument. If they lose their gravity, they are dangerous. He therefore banned women from fighting in the arena entirely. Think about what this decision says. The problem was not protecting women from violence. The captivae were still being held in the rooms beneath the arena. The problem was that the violence was becoming visible enough to damage Rome's self-image. The emperor did not want to eliminate the exploitation. He simply wanted it to remain in the shadows. After Severus's ban, the order did not end. It simply retreated to its natural habitat, the darkness of the hypogeum. And the truly staggering truth is this system did not end with a moral awakening. The games continued even after Rome officially Christianized in the 4th century. CE gladiatorial combat persisted for decades. The last recorded gladiatorial match is said to have taken place in 404 CE. A monk named Telemachus leaped into the arena to stop a fight and was torn apart by the crowd. Only after that did Honorius permanently ban gladiatorial games. But even this did not immediately end the captivity system beneath the arenas. The infrastructure remained in place. The practice of taking war prisoners continued into the Byzantine period alongside imperial logic. The system weakened not through an ethical revolution, but through the dissolution of the empire itself. The conquest machine stopped. The flow of prisoners dried up. The institution died not from moral progress, but from resource exhaustion. Today, when tourists stand before the Colosseum's arches and take photographs, most look up. At the stone, the arches, the engineering. Guides describe gladiatorial duels, wild beast hunts, the emperor's lavish spectacles. They evoke the echo of applause, but they rarely point downward. Those rings are still in the walls. They may be rusted, but they have not disappeared. The nail marks scratched into stone can still be made out beneath centuries of dust. The ledgers in which people were registered by category rather than by name, Germanica, Britannica, Parthica, still sit in European archives today. They are not closed to anyone who wishes to read them. This was not a few excesses. This was a system, an infrastructure, a norm. The Colosseum is not only a symbol of magnificent architecture, it is also a monument to the true nature of empire. Yes, there were victories. Yes, there were feats of engineering. But there was also an order of horror built, planned, and operated to sustain absolute power. Every stone in the arena was paid for, not only with money and labor, but with lives deliberately destroyed. The spectacle above the sand was the face Rome chose to show you. The other face began when the crowd's noise fell silent. In the rooms beneath your feet, those sounds that Roman chroniclers did not consider worth recording, the ones whose names were never written, are still inside the stone. For anyone who wants to listen. This is the story that does not appear in textbooks. If this account opened a new window for you, stay here, because we will keep excavating the parts that were meant to stay buried. Share your thoughts. We'll meet again on the next journey into the dark archive.